first Navy nurse to volunteer for Vietnam and the first Navy flight nurse to volunteer for Korea. Winston Churchill said one time, "There is nothing so exhilarating in life than to be shot at and missed." And that's what happened to me.
So I'm riding around Da Nang in a Jeep in the middle of the night in Vietnam, all by myself, and I'm 23 years old, and I went to Duke University, and I grew up in Walpole, Massachusetts, suburbia, America. Somehow I just believed that it would be okay.
Our bomb wing was selected to go to Guam to be in charge of the B-52 bombing of Vietnam. So I was the first woman ever to deploy with a SAC bomb wing. That was in 1966.
I remember sitting at the table with the typical like female coffee clatch of adults, and they said, "So what are you going to do when you grow up?" You know, kind of thing. And I just wanted to be something other than a secretary, a nurse, or a teacher. I said, I wanted to be something more than that. And they said, "Well, you can't."
I had graduated from the University of Illinois and found that I had majored in the wrong things, that I majored in business, hoping to get a job with a company and be in management. There was very little opportunity for women. There was opportunity for jobs, but you couldn't advance into the management arena. And at that time, lo and behold, I received a recruiting letter from an Army female major, and she told me that they had a special drive to get women as officers, and I would check with the Air Force and see if it had a similar program. It did, and that day I took the test for intelligence, passed it, so I decided I would go in and I'd stay 4 years. If I liked it, I would stay, and if I didn't like it, I would go look for something else.
I knew very early that I would be joining the Army in order to finance my college education. My dad passed away when he was 40, so my mom raised the four of us. All services had a program where they would pay for college education for nurses with a requirement for service following that.
My dad and I built small boats. We fished together. I was just water-oriented all my life. I could not think of any other branch but Navy. I became a flight nurse and graduated from that school and then went to the Korean Theater of Operations.
Really, I had tried to join the Navy, and I'm making all the phone calls to all the armed services for somebody to talk to me. And the Navy said, "Call you right back." And the Marines said, "I'll see you in about 20 minutes. These two guys, probably 23, 24 years old, showed up in like 30 minutes in dress blues at my house and said, "How would you like to go out for spaghetti dinner?" Signed those papers right after spaghetti.
I had friends who were killed in Vietnam while I was in college. I remember very distinctly being in my international relations class and stating I was going to go to nursing school and then I was going to join the Army and go to Vietnam.
I immediately called when I found out I was going to be going, and I said, I'm not weapon qualified. Do I need to go get checked out? And they said, "Oh no, you don't need to do that." And I thought, well, I'm not going to some country that, it's a combat
war zone.
War zone. So I got in touch with my brother-in-law, who was very skilled with weapons, and I went home on leave, and he taught me to fire a rifle, and he taught me to fire a handgun. And so then I got in touch with the Air Force, and I told them that I wanted to take the test to see if I qualified. So the sergeant told me, what I had to do, and this cardboard figure was down there, And so I fired a rifle, I fired the handgun, and so I did it lying down, standing up, and everything he told me to do. So then he said, okay, you can quit, you're a qualified expert. And I said, you've got to be kidding.
A nurse goes through nurses training and does what she was trained to do. A flight nurse does the same thing, only much more high tech. Who's going to do a tracheotomy at 12,000 feet? Who's going to make that cut in that throat? Nobody but the flight nurse.
I went to nursing school at a school that made us feel like we were strong change agents and role models, and we were smart and we could take care of ourselves and make things happen.
It was the Marine Corps who not just maybe taught me about leadership, but showed me women leaders who were really amazing women.
I was very fortunate that a woman, lieutenant colonel, who had served in the Women's Army Corps in World War II, was there and took me under her wing, told me that there was an opportunity to apply to get a regular commission. And I said, well, I haven't even made up my mind to stay in the Air Force. She said, go take that test. So I took the test, and I was selected for a regular commission. And so that caused the Air Force to terminate my assignment at Barksdale Air Force Base and send me overseas to Spain.
I left for Vietnam on July 1st, 1971. I kind of had an idea that war wasn't as glorious as the movies made it out to be. And none of my friends, nobody I knew, was facing what I was facing.
I was on another kind of strange battlefield that you don't get any medals for. You shed a lot of blood, sweat, and tears over it. That social battlefield that was America at that time. You know, you were sort of managed like property. If any guy wanted to date you, the WM Master Sergeant was watching that, and the men had to sign you out and sign you in. And, you know, barbed wire around your barracks. You were protected by Marines. You were 1 to 10,000.
In our bomb wing, there were 3,000 men and me.
There were 7 of us Navy nurses and I think it was 80 corpsmen.
I think there were probably 10 or 12 women in the hospital, and there were 10,000 men in the Phu Bai area for the 101st Airborne.
I was told, you know, we might have to have you here, but that doesn't mean we have to really want you here. But again, the Marine Corps motto at that time was to free men to fight. So you assumed jobs of men, which I was in air traffic control. Only men were in that particular MOS. So I got in as a in-flight clearance, which was considered unique at the time. A big bust through, you know, some of those closed doors.
Broke the ceiling.
Right.
Well, I came back from Guam, and I had applied to go to get my master's degree. My assignment from the University of Alabama when I graduated was to Vietnam.
Nothing could really prepare you for Vietnam.
I will never forget the first patient that I was involved with in the emergency room. They brought in a second lieutenant whose legs were both blown off, and one arm was just a few bones. And I was standing there like I didn't know what to do, trying to talk to him and tell him that we were doing everything we could for him. And I remember going to his clothes and taking out his wallet. He had graduated from West Point. I still remember his name. His parents and his family didn't know what had happened to him. And he was dying. Essentially, he knew he was dying. He knew he didn't want to live with no legs and one arm. And the impact of what war does to people and how it impacts healthy, smart, strong kids really hit me that day.
It's always hard. It's always hard, especially if you're holding his hand. I saw this one boy, and he was, I could tell he was an aviator and a helicopter pilot, no doubt. And I got his last pulse beat. Well, and I had to, find his wallet and get his ID, and I did that in one of his pockets and pulled out this picture of just a pretty girl and a young child, and I assumed it was his wife and child, and there he died right there on my fingertips.
Well, if I think professionally, what I was asked to do as either an air traffic control or as a drill instructor, when you are training recruits, you invest in them, and your day one with them, and then 6 weeks later who they are. And I think so on the drill field, to watch with great pride the women that you've developed over that 6-week period, and to see them marching on that parade field as yours that you're handing over. And it's very, very inspiring to see what you create in that very, it's very hostile, aggressive environment.
When I got there, I was replacing a male major. And that was the only thing that saved me from just completely losing my temper, because I found that my duty was to prepare the quarterly cost-saving report. Well, that was an interesting concept to me, that in the midst of a war that you were busy saving money. And I said, well, what do you do before the next quarterly report? And he said, you just, nothing.
Sit there.
You just wait till the next quarterly report. I was in the management analysis section of the controller office there at the headquarters. So I started reading all the files in the office, and I was the only one who knew what was in the files. The GAO could audit the headquarters there, and the Defense Audit Agency could also audit. So they made me the point of contact. It became a fairly busy job for me.
I think.
We had the press coming in, do a whole front page of the Raleigh-Durham Dispatch on women Marines, and I was selected as a squad leader to get everybody just in the perfect place for when the news rolled, right? So sure enough, my 60 member platoon are all lined up, we're looking ready, we're squared away, everybody's looking immaculate, and the DI walks through the threshold, and you're yelling, 10 hot! Everybody's standing there sharp, and what am I doing? I'm like the last one to be ready, right? I grab my cover and I snatch it on my head, and I think I put it on backwards. And the DI, who was fortunately for me about 5'1", stood at my nose and just proceeded to berate me publicly, shame me. What an idiot! Who did I think I was? Did I think I was Marine material? On and on and on. And I was standing at attention, and the tears are just rolling down my face. I'm just completely stoic, right? That kind of public shaming, like you can't even handle it on Facebook today. But you buck it up, you get over it, and you move on. The next day is the next day. And I think that is the most important lesson that I learned, because just forget about that day. Move on to the next day. Make the next day your best day.
Yeah.
Make the next day your best day. And that has carried me through life.
Suddenly, after like 2 or 3 months in the emergency room, 23 years old, and I'm in charge in a really major trauma center. We had casualties coming in, and when they came in, we knew that we would have one severely injured soldier who would have stepped on a landmine. And so they would probably have some kind of amputations. And then the person in front of him and behind him may have some limbs that needed to be amputated, but would have heavy shrapnel. And the ones beyond them would have injuries that were less severe. And the patients came in, and sure enough, they were the kind of the steps of different severities. And the medic that had been with them came in, and he was running from one to another and talking to them. And all of a sudden we turned around and he had passed out on the floor. He had been injured, but he had been in a state of shock where his adrenaline kept him going.
This one boy was wounded in some sort of a firefight. This boy said to me, "Ma'am," he said, "I have nothing else to give you, but I would like you to have my Green Beret." And he had nothing else. He had hospital pajamas on. That's all he had to his name.
The third night that I was in Phu Bai, sleeping in my hooch, we had an incoming attack that hit so close it sprayed dirt on the metal hooch. I still can feel the fear that I had that night.
We were about a block and a half from the center where all of the groceries and the food like that were sold. So that was a sort of a target for the enemy. So that made it kind of interesting.
Our hospital was based in what the military will tell you is the worst place to ever put a hospital. It was at the end of an airfield. Airfield's a prime target. It was next to a munitions or gasoline dump. Worst place to put a hospital. Good location to try to hit. We were next to MACV headquarters. They were always trying to hit that.
I lived through 7 coups d'etats, and airplanes were bombing the city, and airplanes were dogfighting, all this right in my line of sight. Really exciting. But I missed being injured by 3 inches. I was on the top floor of our hospital on the balcony. I didn't want to miss anything with that coup going on, and this bullet hit 3 inches below me on the balcony.
We felt like we were there for no reason for the United States. It was really difficult from the perspective of seeing young American men coming in maimed and forever changed because of a war that we would never win, and we didn't think anybody in Washington cared whether we won it or not.
The real turmoil wasn't about the war when you're in the service.
Yeah.
The real turmoil was the social fabric of society that was changing, that made it a battlefield socially. In fact, I had orders to Okinawa that were canceled because of essentially what were considered gender wars, even back then. And there were women soldiers who were being raped in Okinawa by male soldiers.
Believe it or not, I think my worst day was the day I left, and tears were streaming down my face. I hated to leave Vietnam, but nevertheless, I had to go home.
When I got to Wright-Patterson as a major, I had done my master's degree. I had had a tour in Vietnam, and I became the first woman to go to the Industrial College of the Armed Forces from the Air Force ever, and the third woman in its history.
My very first patient I ever took care of was a VA patient. I'm working in the VA now, and I think my very last patient I will take care of will be a VA patient.
I spent 33 years in policing and became one of the first female chiefs in the country. Of the 10,000 police departments in the country, there were 10 women police chiefs of major police departments.
Yeah.
I give that success story for me to the Marine Corps.
I went to the unveiling of the Women's Memorial, and people, strangers, came up and said, "Thank you, thank you." That had never happened before.
A lot of nurses went to the dedication, and we marched down Pennsylvania Avenue, and we got standing ovations from military men along the way. and they reached out and hold our hands, and they would say thank you. And it was the best day I can imagine.